because you're not going as big on the first pull of the dungeon. You're not pulling those slimes. So you're going to, I mean, some teams pulled tentacles even yesterday, which is not something that we've seen super, that's not been popular this season after the change to the Plague Borers. But I wonder what Outcast and Cepako are going to do differently now that that stuff has occurred and bolstering is not as clear cut inside of Plaguefall.
Yeah, and I think we also have a lot higher expectations for a lot of these lower bracket games as well, Makes, because they have had so much time to be able to absorb a lot of the different strategies from Group A and Group B, and they also, kind of know what's expected of them as they start being those lower seeded teams going up against some incredibly, incredibly strong and historied teams like Echo.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they could watch the past cups and see what they were doing, see could we adapt to that, how is it going to change with the new affixes. I mean, if we looked at last week's Plaguefall keys, those were tyrannical, and this week we have fortified, so I do think some switching around is necessary for them to actually get a good route throughout the dungeon. But for example, if you know that other teams were able to go in on Stradama with only one of the Torment mobs down, then you should be able to do that on Fortified as well. Or at least you should be able to find a route where that works out. So I'm really excited to see what the teams come up with here today.
And we did see Incarnation doing that earlier whenever they were playing it, like with you said, just killing off one of those tormented mobs. It really becomes a problem on Stradama since it is also quaking and you are playing with that Aura's Cold Heart slow. So you can only
physical
afford
damage
so much. Yeah, so you can only afford so much time, like in the last phase before the spin around the room tentacles eventually catch up to you. But ultimately, you kill that boss off fast enough with it being like a 19 fortified, like you said, that it shouldn't become too big of a problem.
Yeah, we'd seen previous end bosses, in particular Nagura, like in Sanguine Depths, where if the key level's high enough, it just gets so debilitating fighting up against General Call while also having to deal with, 3 of the Tormentor's debuffs at once here. So it's nice to be able to start off with a lower key as well so people can start taking those additional risks.
Yeah, and I think Plaguefall is one of those dungeons where teams have been trying to have more and more Tormentor debuffs on the last boss, just not having to deal with those mobs throughout the dungeon. But it went wrong for some of the teams in previous weekends, previous groups as well. We've had full team wipes because they took the risk. They went in with 3 debuffs and they just didn't manage to have enough damage to basically push her through those rain casts, because that's going to be the most important thing. The more rain casts you get, the worse it's going to be for your group, because at some point it's just unhealable damage with that 50% healing reduction that you have, and you run out of defensive cooldowns to deal with it. So yeah, definitely needs to be perfectly coordinated, and you just need to have that damage. You cannot have any deaths whatsoever, otherwise it's just all going to fall apart.
Yeah, and in particular, we've seen just an odd rarity this season with Paladins going left, right, and center. I mean, there's been the mana nerfs, of course, in 9.1 or 9.05 as well. So there's just even more pressure on these Paladins just to be efficient, because a lot of times we're not running with any external mana, not having any sort of innervates or any sort of support on that end. So it becomes just additional healer challenges that these teams have to think about going into it. Outcast and Cepako is our carry, are ready to roll here. Let's get into it in game number 1 in Plaguefall.
All right, so we already see a very interesting comp from Outcast here as they bring the Guardian Druid, Mistweaver, Affliction Warlock, Havoc, and Shadow Priest. It almost looks like they tried to bring as many unpopular specs as possible into one group. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the overview of specs that we showed earlier, I think they probably just looked at that and were like, okay, which box can we fill? What can we do with that? So, yeah, but both of those teams are going in and they are absolutely smashing it. Really, really big pulls. Outcast is in with the Incinerator, and I think Cepako has him still, in that pack as well, but is now LOSing him, so they should be done with that pull in a little while. I'm a bit confused by that line of sighting that's going on at the moment, but
So there's a big problem with Outcast because they unfortunately aggroed that big. You see that huge mob just auto-attacking everybody. It is bolstering, keep in mind, and I think they accidentally just aggroed that big mob that they tried to skip at the start. And because the trash pool was already dying, it just bolstered super, super high, and there was no way they could deal with that one. So they just decided to wipe it up and reset that. And Cepako also having some issues with bolstering on their side as well, as this Pestilent Harvester is pretty huge. It usually is a very tiny mushroom, but now it's a really big one, as they're trying to just cut it out. And double goes down their Frost Mage as well. So yeah, just having a bunch of issues here as he's casting those Doom Shrooms. Not sure what their plan is here. I'm not sure if they're trying to reset or if they're just trying to finish it off, but everyone just keeps dying at this point.
Yeah, Cepako and Magna also fell to the ground. I'm not sure if at this point it wasn't the smarter strategy to just wipe it and kill it normally, because Outcast is back at that pole, and even though they have more mobs left, they have less deaths and less time wasted by kiting one really, really big mob that they are now still in need to play on Cepako's side. But the next pull should be hopefully a little bit cleaner since all of the mobs have the same HP. So if you have good AoE damage, you should be able to kind of get it down a little bit cleaner, I hope. But first they're going to pick up some of those anima powers that the Incinerator left for them.
Yeah, and AoE damage should definitely be something that they're good at with that comp that they're running, right? Having that Windwalker and that Frost Mage, lots of AoE coming out of Cepako's side. Outcast definitely running a little bit of a different comp, but still having a lot of AoE damage on their side too. And one thing to note is that Outcast actually held on to their Bloodlust, while Cepako did committed to that first big pull that they were doing. So Outcast now finally managed to get their group back up. They finished the mobs that they weren't able to finish off on that wipe before, and now they're back on track. So both of the teams have those 5 deaths on the board, 6 deaths on the board, because their mage just went down on Cepako's side. But yeah, just having more and more issues on Cepako. They're just trying to pick up this anima power, and they have to wait for this patrol, for this Belcher to walk past. And yeah, just losing a lot of time here to get back to their point in the dungeon where they want to continue.
But what is interesting, Outcast has pulled Warcraft to the side and left everything that's in the boss room just right where it was, so they decided to not play those small mobs and the Plague Belchers at all. They just said, okay, we're gonna play the boss here, and whatever comes in our way, we're just gonna CC it and be done with it. Whereas Cepako is running on to do the Thresh first.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting choice, because we've actually seen this a lot in Season 1, when you still had those Plague Borers that would actually explode and help you out. So what teams did was they moved past the first boss, dealt with some of the trash, and then they pulled the Plague Borers back into the boss to make sure they get that extra damage there, because it was so efficient. But it got changed, and these Plague Borers don't actually explode anymore. So yeah, very interesting choice to see Cepako just skip past it. It's possible that they are waiting for certain cooldowns, maybe for the Ashen Hollow. Not sure, but now it looks like they're walking back.
Yeah, I think you're right on with waiting for the cooldowns bit, because we have Ashen, we have Shadow Blades, we have everything else up and ready, so they should be able to just nuke the boss now, and as we see, they're pulling it. However, they don't have Bloodlust since they used it on the first pull, so this should take a little longer than it did for Outcast. However, Cepako already has 22% of trash count, whereas Outcast is only on 13, so they need to catch up there, while Cepako is catching up on that first boss in Playful.
Yeah, Outcast having some trouble as they got hit by those swirlies from the Spinebreaker. Did manage to survive though, so everything's good. And after this pull, I would assume they're going to be gathering up for a little bit of a bigger pull as their cooldowns are coming back up. You can see the Dark Glare of that Affliction Warlock is about to be ready, so they would be able to go for a little bit of a bigger trash pull if they decide to do that. Cepako is doing that same strategy as well that we saw Outcast doing, where they just pull the boss to this exit area. They can't really pull it much further, otherwise it is going to reset, so they have to be careful. And they also have to be careful to fall off. They get hit by that frontal, it actually knocks you, and you can't fall off the platform. I might or might not have done that once.
Really? I actually didn't know that, but me playing a demon hunter, I'll be very careful to not go in that direction. Something that's interesting right now is that while Cepako finished the boss, Outcast could not catch up on the trash count that Cepako had before they pulled the boss. So they would have needed to have 22%, which they are slowly just getting right now. And Cepako's already on the next trash pack. So right now it seems like even though they have one death more on their kind of stamp card, they still have the lead by a tiny bit, and I'm very excited to see what kind of trash packs we're going to see now. In the last weekend, we often saw teams go over the left corner and then pull everything into that barrel and then do the next barrel pull before they went to the stairs. And I'm not sure if the teams are going to do the same thing right here, but it looks like they're going in that direction because obviously you wouldn't want to waste those nice barrel DPS debuffs that help you get those pulls down quickly.
Yeah, and it looks like they're pulling a bunch of these slimes on top of these barrels, as you just mentioned. They're not pulling the congealed... Actually, they are pulling it now. So that congealed slime actually having that damage reduction aura around it doesn't actually get applied to the slimes, though. So that's fine. They can deal with all the slimes together, not having to deal with the aura. That's why they succeed the Plague Binder with a blind to make sure they just don't have to deal with that one. Probably pulling it into the pool after this one. And yeah, one more thing to note is that they do have a rogue on Cepako's side. So if they choose to skip something at some point in a dungeon, then they have that Shroud available, while Outcast does not. So if they want to skip something on their side, they have to do a Invis Potion skip or a Death skip or something like that, which of course is a bigger time loss than using that Shroud.
Yeah, absolutely. What we've seen before is teams just shroud skipping all of the tentacles because you waste so much time on them. Because it's really, really hard to play several of them at the same time, since if there's no tank close to them, they just lash out really, really nasty melee hits, and you obviously wouldn't want to take those as a DPS, as I can maybe say out of experience, they hurt a lot, so that would be a bad idea. Now, Outcast has finished that stairs pull that I was talking about earlier. I really love this pull because it's like the really big one that you usually get to do here. But they didn't pull the two smaller mobs on the left side. They decided to leave them out, and now they're also going to leave out auras. And I think they're going to play the tentacles, or at least that one. Just using the Plague Borers, hoping that they can get through quickly, whereas Cepako is slowly falling behind. They're now on 44%, the same as Outcast, with that 5 seconds death count on the timer on top of that, and just slowly are moving towards the tentacles, which I'm assuming they're going to skip since they have the rogue, but it doesn't look like it.
So it looks like an interesting stretch by Outcast here. It looks like their Demon Hunters off-tanking the Tentacle while their Guardian already went ahead and pulled that mini-boss. So I think that it does make sense because there's only a certain amount of Plague Borers that spawn out of the mini-boss. I think it's a total of 6 sets of 2 Plague Borers that spawn, and then they will just stop spawning. So if you don't want to use them for this Tentacle, you just, send your tank ahead. He's gonna get those Plague Borers, and they just keep exploding on the boss. And you can see Virulax is already really low because the Guardian was just, getting all of those bombs to explode on it. And there it's that. So I really like that change of strategy there, just getting 2 different counts, 2 different trash groups done within the same time.
Is it actually 6 Plague Borers sets, or 6 Plague Borers in total in 3 sets? Because
I'm not
is
sure.
It that many sets? Because I think it's less, but
Could
I'll
be
take
less.
your
I
word
could be
for
making
it.
things up. Sometimes I just make things up, and you just have to be really confident about it.
I'm sorry then.
And people will believe you.
So what Cepako is doing now, they're going down with the remaining Plague Borers, hoping to get some trash in there that they can quickly nuke them using the Plague Borer debuff. Whereas Outcast is already running on, and they're running into the direction of the next Torment mob, and I'm interested to see whether they'll pull the Executioner. Yeah, they are. They're pulling barrels, and I think that's interesting because we had seen teams that would skip him before, but Outcast decided to play him, so they're gonna get less physical damage taken after they killed him by 50%. Oh, no, actually, they're gonna get 50% healing more.
Yeah,
Sargon
it's
is
the
physical
50%
damage.
healing that. Yeah, so that's something we've seen teams, especially on live keys. This is a really common strategy because Varuth is actually one of the 2 tormentors that drops a DPS increased power. You have Sagadon and then also Oros who drop the defensive ones, and then you have Varuth and the Incinerator who drop those offensive ones. So if they decide on killing Varuth anyway, it makes sense to just deal with it before the boss, so you do have that extra damage for the boss. But yeah, both of the teams actually deciding on doing that. They don't want to deal with that 50% healing reduction aura on Stradama, and I respect the decision because I do think whenever you're in this lower bracket and you're playing against these teams where you say, okay, we don't have enough time to do any of these like super crazy strats, so we would rather go with a little bit of a safer route and a safer strat, and hope that maybe the other team doesn't go with a safer strat and then messes it up. But Outcast and Cepako are actually going with a very similar safe strat. So at this point, both of them are at the same point of dungeon and doing very similar routes too.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I wish they would risk more, to be honest. Like, I would wish they would just pull bigger and dare to do something, but both of those teams have decided to just play it safe and play it group by group, very, very slow but steady, which might also be due to that kind of, not so lucky pull in the beginning. Where both teams had lost some feathers, and yeah, maybe they just decided after that, okay, we tried to pull really big and we tried to kind of put some effort in, and it didn't work out, so now we're just gonna go step by step.
Yeah, I definitely think it makes sense for Outcasts, especially as they're basically ahead in the dungeon now. They have 5% less trash, but they did pull the boss quite a bit earlier, so I still think it's really close between the 2 teams. And I wonder how they play Dr. Icarus as well. It is not tyrannical, and it's just a 19, so they could be ignoring these bombs and just make sure they use some of their defensives to survive the explosion. And it looks like that's what they are doing. Their Guardian tank is just kiting the congealed slime around. He was taunting it out and then using the CC. He's also running Mass Root actually on that bear tank. So he's got a lot of, they have a lot of CC to deal with these slimes. So it shouldn't be a problem for them. They also have the Ring of Peace and the Typhoon. Actually, I'm not sure if they have Typhoon because he needs to be running Balance Affinity for that one. Let me check. Yeah, he is. So they have Typhoon and they also have that Mass Root.
Oh, so they have all of the CC, whereas Cepako just decided to play those bombs, as we said before. They're going steady but slowly. And maybe they're going to skip that very last bomb that we now see on the left side. No, it seems like they're going to play that as well. And just make sure they don't get any unlucky bomb explosions in their party at this moment. While Dr. Icarus is on 2%, should be dying now for Cepako. Outcast is already running on, and the next trash pack is actually very scary on Fortified. So I'm excited to see what they do with it, because it's super, super easy to just bolster the very big, I think it's Spinebreaker.
Could be. I just always call him Big Mop.
Yeah.
But
yeah, that
Spinebreaker
works.
might be correct. As they're both dealing with this slime tentacle, it looks like Cepako also pulled the right side in, that Defender of Many Eyes and that Crushing Slime on the right. They're just trying to even out the damage to not have anything bolster here. But yeah, that middle pack that you just talked about, that can be scary because they have all different kinds of HP levels because they're fighting each other, as you can see. So definitely need to make sure to even out the damage. We saw the Boom Bear use his Convoke the Spirits. He's actually playing Night Fae on that Guardian Druid.
Yeah, so they are in on that pole where Cepako is already running on. But I think they managed to kill him off before he got super, super bolster. And now Outcast is moving on as well. but I don't think, no, they're not playing Sagadon, so that could be interesting in the end, but shouldn't be, hopefully. Since it isn't tyrannical, the bosses shouldn't be too hard on those teams anyway. And now we're just gonna deal with some of the stealth things. We have seen some players get assassinated. We're just seeing it on Cepako's side. Magno has suffered some damage. Bach is following him straight after, 2 players down on Cepako. That is another 10 death seconds that they're getting on top of their time. That is going to be really, really hard on them. But they also have to finish that pull so they can res their friends, since there's only 1 battle res up that they can use. And Outcast is doing a better job at controlling those stuff things.
Yeah, they're having a hard time on Cepako's side because you also see those stealthlings just spawning in the goo on the side, and then it's harder to get those AoE CCs onto them to make sure they're not casting that jump, the ambush. Obviously, that's going to be a really bad time if that ambush goes through. So looks like Outcast doing definitely a little bit of a better job as they're dealing with the left side ambusher pack now. And then they should be having enough trash. You can look at the percentage, both of them really even at this point. Of course, the 4 deaths that Cepako has more in favor of Outcast, having that extra time on the board, those 20 seconds in favor. That might actually matter at the end because they're so close. Of course, if you look at the time here, we are 18 minutes into the dungeon and both of the teams are just now reaching the 3rd boss. So definitely a little bit of a slower route from both of the teams. But because both of the teams are running that slower route, it can still be incredibly close between them, as Outcast is now pulling Domina Venomblade. Both of them do have Bloodlust available, but I would say it's very likely that they're saving it for the last boss.
Yeah, I agree. I would lust the last boss. Usually we've seen it in the 2nd phase on Stradama. As you already mentioned earlier, you usually only want to have 1 healing rain and not a 2nd one, otherwise it becomes really, really difficult with the D-spells and the healing requirement on the team, and it's just going to be very, very hard to play down in a smooth way. So I do think they're going to hold on to that. The trash count is looking pretty good so far. If they go down like this, both teams still have to play at least one of the little blobs. I actually don't know.
The slimes,
so,
yeah.
the slimes, exactly. So Cepako has to play... Oh no, so they have enough trash count, but Outcast might have to do it, but they're getting assassins in now from the mob. They could pull the one... I think they skipped one at the beginning of the boss room and just pushed it in there as well just now. So they could get a little more trash count if they did that. I couldn't catch it. But Domina Venomblade is going down. She's on 26% for Outcast now. Cepako is following up very closely on 30%, plus the 4 death counts that they have on top of that. So they're still a little bit behind Outcast here.
Yeah, and it looks like Cepako did use that Bloodlust for Domina here, as Outcast is still holding on to that last. But because of the Bloodlust, Cepako did catch up quite a bit on the boss DPS. You can see they're almost caught up all the way, even though they pulled the boss quite a lot later. It also has something to do with that Ashen as well, because Outcast, of course, playing that Mistweaver Monk, so not having that huge damage output that the Venthyr Paladin can provide. So that's why Cepako caught up all of this time now, because of the last and the Ashen just dishing out so much damage. And I'm pretty sure Cepako went a little bit over percentage there. I think they're gonna be going over 100 as they're already in 86. So a little bit of a miscalculation, or maybe they accidentally pulled something that they weren't supposed to pull. It happens, right? And Outcast is again on 82, so they need 1 extra slime. It's possible if they have enough, because of course we don't see the exact percentage here, so it might be possible that they do have enough.
I don't think, because if when they went down, they were on 81, so they should need to play all 3 of the slimes, whereas the Cepako should end up at 102 if that would show up on our overview. What you need to be careful here is that those devoted can be really, really mean with bolstering, and Outcast has just decided to to play several packs. So they're going to get a lot of bolstering stacks on those Devoteds just now.
Yeah, definitely something you can deal with because they don't have too much HP, but you don't want to, right? If you can avoid those bolstering stacks, you definitely want to. And looks like Outcast did finish off the mini boss before they finished off the devoted ads, so they have to make sure they're not aggroing the boss at this point. That's why everyone is walking away into the corner. Now Outcast is going to get those slimes that they still need, while Cepako is done. They are already fighting Margrave Stradama, sorry. And remember, it's 1945. So that boss dies really quickly. They don't have the Bloodlust available, but Bloodlust is not actually that efficient on Stradama anyway, because she goes away percentage-based, so you will never get a full uptime Bloodlust on her, because there's no way you need 45 seconds for one phase. So getting the Bloodlust on the previous boss was actually faster to do for Cepako, unless you need it to be able to kill Stradama. So if you would, for example, have the 50% healing reduction on Stradama, then it makes sense that you would save the Bloodlust. But since they dealt with the Root and they dealt with Incinerator, they only have the slow and the physical damage increase. So I do like the strategy here by Cepako that they feel like, oh, we don't need the Bloodlust for Stradama, so we're just going to use it for speed and use it on the previous boss.
I think Outcast also miscalculated their trash can because they could have played the slimes earlier when they were playing the two mobs in the hallway, but they didn't. They ran down, played all of the Devoteds, and now had to walk back up, play the slimes, and then walk back down, which also added a little bit of extra time on their timer here before they could actually pull Stradama. And now they just need to make up for it. As you said already, that's gonna be hard because they don't have that much uptime on that Bloodlust altogether. Cepako is already on the last phase of Stradama, whereas Outcast is trying to push her really quickly into her first intermission. But since those intermissions are just time stamped, I'd say, so there is a certain time that they take to finish. You can't just push them any quicker. You have to play 2 of those tentacle sets, and then only after that she is going to come back up. Cepako has already finished their boss and therefore won this dungeon here, I think. We're only waiting for the death seconds that they had on top of Outcast, but it should come out in favor of Cepako, I think.
Cepako taking, of course, that victory here in Plaguefall in game number 1, and number of deaths and mistakes kind of across the board on this one, Titles, but victory nonetheless.
I think that things like this just kind of keep us humble with how hard some of these dungeons truly are. Like a 19 Plaguefall, while you think about that and then you're like, oh, it's a 19, it should be too bad. It's bolstering, and these groups are, I mean, they still did it in 24-ish minutes. That is a very fast run, and one that required a lot of adaptation and different strategies for like how they were going to pull the dungeon. And there was a little bit of bolstering here and bolstering there that caused the team some problems. But you know, we overcome and we pull again.
That's right. And let's start talking about some of those extra bolsters, because they just started leading to deaths and more time loss and everything.
Yeah, exactly. And it really started with the first pull of the dungeon. It's the pull that we always talk about. It's just so hard. Cepako ends up not Cepako. Outcast ends up going a little bit slower on their first pull. Then they had that slime giant patrol, which, if you don't know, that patrol is actually just massive. They had a patrol into the pack, and so then they had a very bolstered giant. That became a problem on the side of Cepako. They were doing the Incinerator Arcoleth, and you see this Petulant Harvester, this big mushroom. This guy, that is a big boy right there. And sure, they have threat on him, but eventually they just have everybody bleed out, get meleeed, and die. Both teams have issues at the beginning of the dungeon. It just happened. Both teams recovered, and I thought that Outcast got the better of the beginning here, where they continue to pull on. You do even see Boom Bear is doing the mini-boss while the rest of his group is off fighting that tentacle. Then they were both onto Dr. Ickis. Outcast ended up killing Dr. Ickis just a little bit ahead, and I thought that their Dominant Venom Blade room was slightly better as well than the side of Cepako, because Cepako was like right with them during Dr. Ickis, and like Cepako ended up having some problems on a tentacle. But then Outcast, that triple slime pull, yeah, it's bolstering. I feel like that triple slime pull definitely could have been improved somewhere else. It's just like, But at the end of the day, it comes down to where do you want to get count on bolstering, right? And this was that pull that I was talking about from Outcast that I thought was really good. How they had this whole entire thing set up, how they were making sure that they CC'd and got the mobs in, where they were managing their bolstering. This felt really solid, but then the missing of the count and needing the 3 slimes, that felt like that could have been a different pull somewhere else, maybe. What is that, like, those are 8 count apiece or the 6 count apiece? I feel like you could have maybe have gotten 2 more slimes in a different area and just used Plague Board to bomb those. At the same time, though, it is what it is. Like, both of the teams had some bolstering mistakes. I felt like these are those runs whenever you're practicing and you make a mistake on the first pull, you zone out and you go again, right? And you're just like, well, you don't practice for making mistakes like that, and it's really hard to be able to recover. And both of the teams were able to recover in a fairly meaningful way and ended up putting up a pretty decent performance on both sides, even though they had mistakes in the beginning.
Yeah, I think it certainly, starts putting into perspective how strong some of these teams are. And I feel like a lot of times as well, makes whenever you zoom out from these dungeons, when you have it from, our spectator perspective rather than watching somebody streaming, doing it themselves, it always seems like, oh, well, that takes, quite a long time compared to some of these other competitors or something, but they're still doing these dungeons just, kind of compared to the general popular, still doing it very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also something that you have to keep in mind with a format like the MDI. There are obviously teams like Echo and Perplexed, or even the players on Complexity who have kind of online time or view time from the race normally. They're used to people watching over their shoulders. They're used to being on streams where thousands of people are watching. Whereas some of these newer teams, this is a new experience for them, and that obviously also adds on top of that. They might be a little nervous, and it's just something to keep in mind. I'm personally very, very happy with the changes of the MDI. I love to see new faces coming in. I love to see new teams fighting for a spot here, and I really, really hope we can have that many people competing. Yeah.
I think that's an important point, because like we have to make new veteran MDI players somewhere, and ultimately it does have to start at some point, and these teams can go on to absolutely do great things. They just need to build off the experiences that they are making right here and learn from what they did during practice and learn how to practice a little bit more efficiently in the future for sure.
That's right. And, these dungeons aren't going to be getting any easier for these teams, Nagura, as we have 21 Sanguine Depths going to be coming around the corner for us. And, these aren't the worst affixes that we could cook up for it, but still, this dungeon is no yoke.
Yeah, Sanguine Depths definitely one of those harder dungeons for sure, especially on Tyrannical. But Bursting Volcanic is definitely a doable affix combination. And we've already seen some really quick Sanguine Depths. We've seen 15-minute 32 clears by Echo just earlier, and Reload Esports being just a little bit behind them as well. So I don't expect Outcast or Cepako to have any of those times, but you can totally see that it is possible to do really quick, really fast pulls, big pulls there as well. And having those affixes definitely makes it a bit easier for them. I do think bolstering is one of the meanest affixes, especially when it comes to MDI style routing, because especially if you're a new team, you probably want to look at what other teams are doing and maybe go from that, right? You just look at other strats and maybe copy a lot, because maybe you're not so used to coming up with your own strategies. But if you have bolstering in Plaguefall and none of the other groups had bolstering, it's really hard to copy anything from the other teams. So maybe they had an easier time seeing some of the strats in Sanguine Depths.
Yeah, I think that's always a very good comparable sort of point, is we've seen, even some of our best teams. We saw, last week, for example, makes where Ambition was struggling quite a bit with some of their bolstering management when something like Missed the Tyrna Scythe, for example. So no matter what the teams are, it's just a very massive challenge that they always have to be worrying about compared to some of these other affixes, which don't require as much DPS control.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to say bolstering for the MDI is my least favorite affix, because the one thing that I think most of the people really like about the MDI is when they just pull a lot of mobs and they blast those really, really big numbers, and you can just see them pumping, and it's so much fun to see what people are actually able to get out of their classes using different strats. I mean, we saw the Night Fae Mage earlier that was absolutely pumping numbers. And I think if you have bolstering, it always kind of counteracts that. So teams really have to take a step back and reevaluate what they're going to do, how are they going to do it. You have to focus damage on mobs that have more HP, and that can always be a little bit painful.
Let's see what these teams are going to be having cooked up for us here in Sanguine Depths. And Cepako is our carry, up 1 versus Outcast.
All right, so it looks like both of the teams have switched to a more MDI-style comp, as Outcast switched away from the Guardian and the Mistweaver and are now running Vengeance Demon Hunter and Holy Paladin as well. On top of that, they still have that Havoc Demon Hunter, while Cepako is sticking to that Rogue. So other than the Rogue and the Demon Hunter, they are running a mirror comp on both their sides, and they're all doing a pretty... I think they're doing the same pull as well, as they pull the whole hallway with the Brute all the way at the end of the hallway as well, and they're all pulling it into this Venthyr Lantern that they have activated.
Yeah, and they're gonna get that juicy buff from that lantern, and they're trying to kind of make it last as long as possible, and then run on, and Cepako has already managed to do that. They're topping their healer, and it was a little bit scary there for 1 second, but Outcast should be following suit as they kill their last Brute and now run on as well. I'm really excited to see whether or not we're going to see a big pull into the boss here, or if the teams decide to play it a little bit smaller than we've seen from other teams before. So earlier and also last cup, we had seen teams that would pull the Incinerator and every other mob basically that they could find on that big kind of path to the boss, into the boss, whereas some teams decided to play it a little bit smaller, keep the Incinerator out of it, and I think that is what both teams are doing here. We have Bloodlust on for both teams, and they're absolutely smashing those mobs away.
Yeah, it looks like we do have one death on that priest, though unfortunately for Cepako. They have a Battle Rush available, and their mage did manage to cast it through before that Brute Smash came out. Outcast also having a little bit of an issue, as their mage did proc that Dreamweaver pot. So you can see the debuff is not going to be able to get triggered again for another 10 minutes. But it looks like both of them did execute this pull pretty cleanly. One thing I was a little bit worried about for a second was I didn't see the Ashen Hollow on that Paladin for Outcast. So for a second I was thinking that he maybe is playing a different Covenant. But it was just not there because he hasn't pressed the ability until they were at the boss. So he is playing that Venthyr Paladin as well. And you can see the numbers in the damage meter too, just huge damage coming out of the healers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's something that's been said over and over and over and over again, how much damage Holy Paladins can actually pump at the current meta. And I do think it would be nice to see a Holy Priest, as Jack said earlier, in the MDI. I'm still waiting for those teams. Maybe one of them will do me the favor of doing that. But for now, Cepako is on Crixus with 15%. Both of the teams have 20% trash count. Cepako has one death that they have to account for with 5 seconds, but they have the boss down quite a little bit lower than their counterpart, and I think that it should be more than 5 seconds that they have the lead here.
Yeah, I believe so as well. And both of them do still have to go back and deal with the Incinerator. Obviously, not a single MDI team has left that Tormentor up just yet, and I doubt either of those teams want to be the first ones to do so. Looks like Outcast actually has some issues as their Shadow Priest... Oh, I just realized their Shadow Priest on Outcast side is playing Night Fae. He has just procced that Dreamweaver pod as well, while the Shadow Priest on Cepako's side is playing Necrolord. So a little bit of a difference in Covenants here, which is interesting because usually we see those Night Fae priests whenever they have a Fire Mage to make sure they can use those Fae Guardians to reduce the combustion cooldown. But with Frost Mage, not so common to actually see the Night Fae Shadow Priest.
Yeah, it's also a bit weird with the choice of a Havoc Demon Hunter. I mean, as I said, that's one of the classes that I play, and we haven't seen Havocs that much in the MDI just yet. But I think that's another Outcast special here for us. They just decided to fill up our little stamp card of specs and classes we haven't seen yet, and Havoc was one of the ones that they wanted to participate on. I personally like seeing variety. I mean, as we talked about last weekend with the Warlock coming in and Sanguine Depths and absolutely pumping and making good for that class choice. Sometimes you just have to try new classes and new strats here, and maybe one of those strats is better than the ones that we saw before, even though it isn't in the meta right now.
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't think that Havoc Demon Hunter is necessarily that bad. I think the problem with Havoc is mainly that the Vengeance Demon Hunter is just so good, right? So you basically don't need the magic damage increase that the Demon Hunter provides, because the Vengeance Demon Hunter is already covering that buff. So a lot of the utility you would provide for your group is already being provided by that Vengeance Demon Hunter. So that's a little bit of an issue for those Havoc Demon Hunters, which is also another thing for other classes too, right? For example, Feral Druids or any other Druids that are in like Moonkins. A lot of them, you feel like, oh, you don't need the Feral, because why would you bring a Feral when you can bring the Moonkin? Because they have the same kind of utility, right? And I think that's a very similar issue for Havoc as well. But as I say that, Good Panda went down, unfortunately, that Havoc going down. But thankfully the respawn spot is very close, but they're having some more issues on their side as their Holy Paladin goes down too, and their Shadow Priest. Everything's just falling apart as they were trying to do a really big pull with the Sentinel and the Oppressors on top of it. Seems like they have to reset the whole thing, unfortunately.
Yeah, they had a full wipe, and I think, now the mobs have reset. For a second I was scared one of them was still in fight with them. And I'm curious to see if they're just going to try again and do that really, really big pull that we've seen from other teams before, or if they decide to go a little bit smaller now. Whereas Cepako has already moved on into the next hallway and is doing a really, really good job with those mobs there. I think Outcast is coming through. I'm a little bit scared to say that. I don't want to cast or curse it. Tattles would have Ashen Hollow ready if he wanted to use it, but I don't think he does. They can finish the pull like this, just the Oppressors that they have to down now, and then they're going to pull the Sentinel. Here it is. And Tattle is actually dropping.
Facial. Oh no! You got hit by that frontal debuff from the Sentinel, the frontal bleed. He could have survived if he used a Dwarf Racial, but he probably, you don't always play Dwarf. That is something that that I would have to get used to for sure. I remember when I switched from Night Fate to Venthyr, and I still had this muscle memory of having Soul Shape, and I constantly tried to Soul Shape out of things, and it's like, oh, I don't actually have that anymore. And that is also something that these MDI teams have to get used to. If you're new to the MDI, and you don't play Alliance on the live servers, and then all of a sudden you remember, oh, I have a Dwarf Racial, I can actually get rid of these debuffs. That is definitely like a muscle memory that you need to learn and you need to practice. But yeah, it looks like Cepako is doing a pretty good job, as they already are in this like inner ring of the second boss.
Yeah, absolutely. They've, since that one death that they had in the boss pool, they've come really, really far and are going through smoothly. They're now trying to pull a little bit bigger, but it should be going down just fine since some of the boss mobs are already nearly dead, whereas the new ones has just come in. They're still in that lantern, so they're getting buffed. Uptime here and stacks, and Outcast is now proceeding to do the same thing. They're pulling the mobs into the lantern, and I think that's going to be a really, really big pull. I'm a little bit scared for them for what is coming next, since they struggled a little bit in that last big pull, but now we have Ashen Hollow down, and we hopefully can get through this here.
Oh, that looked so good, as the Demon Hunter was, it looked like he was spell rushing out, and then he used his meta to jump back in, but he jumped back into like a knock-up, so he was just jumping and got knocked up into the air. But thankfully it did survive as they're finishing up this pull, and they are committing a lot of cooldowns here. They have the Ashen as well from the Holy Paladin, so it looks like they're fine, but definitely a bit scary as the bursting stacks are now coming in, and you can see the defense, the debuffs are stacking up, the damage reduction from the Overseer. Cepako on the other side, they're dealing with that mini boss, They already dealt with Varuth as well, so they only have 2 Tormentors left, which I would assume they're dealing with one more. Sogodon,
I hope.
because that
I
one
really
is really
hope.
scary. Yeah, I hope so as well. And yeah, now they're moving on and dealing with more trash in that inner ring. They already dealt with 1 Lantern, and if they want to extend that Lantern buff that they already have on them, then they need to go quickly over there and activate the 2nd Lantern.
Yeah, but I think they can manage to do that. I'm really, really happy with how Cepako is doing so far. They're working their way through that Sanguine Depths. Outcast is trying to follow suit. They're now at Varuth as well, and the little mini-boss that you just talked about for Cepako, and they should be finishing that up beautifully in just a little while. Obviously, it is tyrannical, so the mini-boss shouldn't take too long for them. And like you said, yeah, I really, really hope they're going to play Sogodon. The few teams that have attempted to play the last boss without the Sogodon mob down had quite some problems, and it is possible, but it's definitely not easy. And from what we've seen from these teams so far, I would prefer if they keep it on the slow and steady route, since it's working out for them quite well. They might not have the fastest times here, but they're definitely coming through rather clean. At least on Cepako's side. For this dungeon, Outcast could have a little less deaths, but, you know, I hope it's going better for them from now on.
Yeah, so we see Cepako doing this huge pull here with the Sentinels and the Warden just on top of this Lantern. Looked like, unfortunately, one of the casts went through from the Warden, but Cepako did have the bubble available to get rid of it, but now double drops incredibly low. It's just trying to catch up on the healing here and everybody as they get all of those bursting stacks on everyone, and just everyone drops low. But it looks like a lot of healing coming out of Cepako. Doing
Living
a really
up
good
to
job
the
keeping
name.
everyone yes, definitely living up to that name. As he's carrying the group, making sure no one goes down.
What a beautiful demonstration of name choice right here in front of our eyes. Cepako absolutely holding out his hands over the whole group, making sure everybody gets to this just fine. Very, very good. The team made it, and now they're on Tarval. It's actually not the worst boss, I think, but if you're a Zug melee player like me, it can be really easy to mess it up here, because you always need to hard switch on the little ads, and you still need to dodge those lasers left and right. And yeah, sometimes when you're like, you know, just blasting numbers, it can be hard to remember that.
Yeah,
so yeah, but they're doing a good job of it.
Yeah, they are, and they committed. I'm actually a bit surprised that they committed so many offensives, because they had the Lantern buffs on everybody, so had the damage increase from the Venthyr buff. They had also committed the Bloodlust and the Ashen from the Paladin. So I would assume that they're going a bit slower in this room. Okay, so it looks like they're pulling Sogodon with some of the trash here. I really like this, because I don't want them to go into the next boss without any of those offensive cooldowns ready.
Yeah.
Because at 21 Tyrannical, the 3rd boss is really dangerous. There's just so much AoE damage coming out, and if you have to deal, if you don't have any offensives ready and you don't have the Ashen from the Paladin, then that can be really scary. But yeah, it looks like they're just taking the time to deal with Sogodon, because they would kill it anyway. Might as well do it now while they wait for the cooldowns to come back up, and then afterwards they're gonna go into the boss.
Absolutely. So I think that's something that I kind of didn't like with the other teams that played Sogodon. They usually would just go to the boss and then play Sogodon afterwards, just using that time from the boss to the gauntlet to recover their cooldowns. But I think you can do it the way that Cepako does it now just as well. They're finishing up on him. They have Ashen Hollow in 3 minutes. They still have a lot of trash to do around the boss room, and now they have their little powers, making sure they're safe and sound, whereas Outcast should be pulling Tarvold in just a little bit.
Yeah, and just to answer a question real quick about the classes, so the teams are allowed to play multiple of the same class, they're just not allowed to play the same spec. So that's why we see the 2 Demon Hunters here. That's why we can have a Vengeance Demon Hunter and a Havoc. But of course, there wouldn't be a 3rd Demon Hunter allowed because they only have 2 specs. But theoretically, you could have 3 mages, right? You could have a Fire Mage, Frost Mage, and Arcane, if that's what you would choose to do. I don't think that's very wise, but you can if you want to. And now Cepako is fighting that 3rd boss, Berillia. They're dropping incredibly low because of that huge AoE damage coming out of the boss. And they're already they're still pretty early on in the fight, and they already had to commit a lot of those defensives. You can see the Forbearance is on the Paladin, so he has used his bubble, and the Leon Hand is on cooldown as well. Dispersion and Cloak still available, and the Ice Block from the Mage just came up as well. So they do have a lot of defensive still, if needed, but yeah, just a lot of AoE damage coming out of that boss.
Absolutely, and she's only on like 58%, so they need to survive that intermission at least 2 more times, I think. And that's really, really scary what's coming in for them now, but I hope Cepako can live up to his name and carry his group out of this as the designated healer here on the Holy Paladin. I was actually, when you were saying that about the different specs, I was thinking about what if a team came up with like 4 druids?
Yeah.
I think that's something Outcast should try in the next MDI. I think they can do it.
And then just play with 4 people. Just don't even bring a 5th player, right?
I think there's a rule against that.
Aw. Plan ruined. What would be the 5th class you bring? What is the...
maybe
is
like
the one
just
class
a
that fits
priest
to the
for
druid
PI.
specs?
You know? And then all of the druids can discuss who gets it. Because I think that's what druids do most of the time.
I'm gonna give it to the rest of druids.
Yeah!
Oh no, Outcast actually dropping really low as they're getting hit by some of those beams. No, their Paladin goes down. They do have a battle rest available, but they have to use the engineering rest, and he's sitting in that pool of blood on the floor. The mage is trying to get it off, but he doesn't get it as he goes down as well, and I'm not sure if they can even get it off at this point, because they're just both sitting in that pool. Good Panda is trying, but he's not close enough, I don't think. Okay, he's going closer now. The beam is... no, disaster for Outcast. Oh, what an unfortunate point to die. This is the problem if you don't have any of those rest classes, right? Because you have that engineering rest, you do have it, but you have to go in melee range, and it has a cast time, and sometimes it's just so hard to get it off if the person died in a bad spot.
Absolutely. That was really, really unfortunate here. I think they could have done it, maybe, if they acted really quickly and with a defensive cooldown, maybe. But it's definitely hard to pull off because you need to realize it. Then there's the beams coming, as we just saw, that can easily wipe you since the cast time is a little while, and you need to get it through before the person can pick it up. They would have had the battle rests available, but they just couldn't use the engineering rest right there, and that's a full wipe on Tarwal. You see Tal walking back there. He's gonna rest the Havoc Demon Hunter, where Cepako has moved on to the Gauntlet. They're in fight with the General Call and are now moving on to the next step where the mobs are going to be, and I think there's also the Lantern that should get them a nice juicy buff in just a short while.
Yeah, so they're trying to focus down General Kal here to make her transition into the next area, and then they're going to be moving on to the Lantern as well. They're almost done at this point, only need that 11% trash, and they actually played really clean. Again, of course not the fastest strat that we have seen, the fastest route, but the important thing is that they are playing really clean. After that Plague Fall, where both of the teams did have mistakes, and things just went wrong here and there, Cepako actually managed to stay calm and got everything together and managed to play this dungeon really cleanly. They only have this one death on the board. Hopefully it didn't jinx them just now, but they're moving on to that Lantern. And the only thing that is left to wonder is if they're actually going to be using that Lantern buff for the boss fight, or if they're going to activate it now and just, use it for the trash that they still have to do.
Yeah, and it looks like they're going to activate it now, and just going to use it for the Gauntlet to get it through here in, a quick demeanor, and that should be working out just fine. While you were informing us of what was going on, I had a sneak peek into the gear of the mages, because earlier in the match from Echo versus Reload Esports, there was something that Cyronic spotted that was really interesting about the mage. Oh, I think it was actually a Halls of Atonement, but then later on the Sanguine as well. And that was that the Frost Mage from Reload Esports was actually playing with the Nightly Legendary, the shifting power one. And that was working out really, really well for Reload Esports, since he was doing great numbers and actually absolutely blasting through both of those keys. And I just checked whether or not those two mages were running it, and actually Cepako's mage has decided to play that Nightfade Legendary. I'm curious whether or not they had planned that before, or if they just switched it up after they seen the first match of today. But maybe that is what is giving them the lead here, so they have that mage running that Legendary that's absolutely bonkers, and that is helping them to get through this run smoothly.
Yeah, that is very interesting, actually, seeing that their mage... I mean, it is possible that Double has been playing this mage this whole time, and now he's saying, oh my god, I was the one inventing this, and now they're just taking away my glory and giving it to Simpkins. But yeah. But yeah, it's very good to see that multiple mages are adapting and just coming up with different kinds of ideas and switching around their setup a little. Now Cepako is engaging General Cull. They do have the 50% slow, so that is something that can be dangerous because of the charge. It's a lot harder to dodge the charge here and not get hit by that bleed effect if you have that slow. Usually it's only possible if you have, you know, like a blink effect or something like that, because without blinks you need to be walking super, super fast, and that's obviously not possible with that reduction unless you have something like Freedom from the Paladin. But yeah, it looks like they're doing a good job. They're obviously up to 100% trash at this point, so they only have to finish off the boss. Bloodlust coming up in 30 seconds, so that's still a thing that they have. That Ashen has already been popped by the Paladin though, so yeah, just have to get through this. Unfortunately, Cepako got hit by 2 bleed effects. The Dwarf Racial, there we go, he has popped it. Woo, Cepako, getting rid of those bleeds. Yeah, I mean...
Well, actually, they did something really, really cool that we also saw, you know, esports do earlier in their Sanguine deaths. They pulled a lot of the trash into the boss and pulled it together with the boss. But right now they're sitting on Bloodlust, and I'm not sure when they're planning to use that. I'm just not checking.
Oh, they're saving it for the next dungeon. It's okay.
When the cooldowns are coming back up, I think it's a little de-amming that we're witnessing here from Cepako. They're just saying, yeah, we're finishing this boss without Bloodlust, just watch us do it. Or maybe they forgot it's there, I'm not sure, but yeah, Cepako.
Nah, that's just a power move. They're establishing dominance. They're just saying they don't need this Bloodlust. But yeah, they still have 5% left to go, so it would be beneficial if they used it, but you know, maybe they did the dungeon in practice and they just didn't have it up at this point, so there's like no one thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe the mage is thinking about the shifting power legendary, you know? So he doesn't have any
Why
time
didn't
to
I
think about
think
Bloodlust.
of this earlier? Yeah, so that's a new meta right now. I hope everybody's taking notes back at home, playing bosses without Bloodlust and just having that Bloodlust ready for the next dungeon they're gonna go in, because Cepako winning this round means they're moving on to the next round. They will face Omega Pump, which should be very interesting. I'm excited to see what they come up with. This is a 2-0 win for Cepako against Outcast. That means Outcast is sadly out of the tournament for now, but I hope they will return in all their glory. Whereas, like I just said, Cepako is moving on.
That's right. They take the victory and have sent Outcast to the Shadow Realms. Titles. Cepako taking that victory, not having as many mistakes as we were seeing previously, like for example in the Plague Falls. So like we talked about, less pressure from that bolstering affix. They were able to play their game and be able to execute their strategy very well.
Yeah, Cepako channeled the Millennium Puzzle here and really had a pretty good Sanguine Depths run, all things considered.
Man.
Like,